Welcome to Clinical Lab Chat, part of the MedCore Podcast Network. I'm Chris Wolski, Director of Business Intelligence for CLP, and today we'll be talking about how point-of-care testing improves access, which I know everyone is always interested in hearing about. I'm joined today by Seth Egan, co-founder and Chief Commercialization Officer for Co-Diagnostics. With over 12 years of experience in the diagnostics field, Seth has played a key role in executive management of the company, including company operations, financing, product introductions, and co-managing the Co-Dx-Cosera JV relationship between Co-Dx and India's Symbiotics LDT. He's eager to see new Co-Dx PCR Pro platform make a significant impact by providing PCR tests worldwide to both developed and emerging nations. So, Seth, I've been looking forward to hearing your insights about this all week. So let's get right to it. So, access to care is a challenge for many in the U.S. and the world. As we know, that was a discussion the other night in the presidential debate. But even more troubling, I think, is that about 40% of people worldwide don't have access to basic diagnostic testing. So how can point-of-care testing change this statistic, and what does it mean for treatment as a result?
Yeah. Well, Chris, first, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be on your podcast. So let's begin here with the U.S. In March of 2023, the National Association of Community Health Centers published a report stating that nearly a third of Americans in the U.S. lack access to primary care. More than 100 million people in the United States don't have a primary care provider, and about a quarter of those are children. So instead, many patients use urgent care or emergency services instead of primary care, waiting until there's an issue to seek the care that they need.
Right.
Making diagnostics accessible in more environments, including at the point of care or in the home, would allow individuals to take faster action and make a more informed decision about isolation and treatment to help limit the spread of flu A and B, RSV, COVID, strep throat, etc. And then moving to the global perspective,
Right.
It's been reported that in low and middle income countries, sometimes referenced as LMICs, patients often seek care at lower levels. This is in clinics, health posts, community healthcare facilities, but fewer than 30% of TB patients are able to receive a diagnostics where they initially seek care. So in many resource-limited settings, patients have to be seen by multiple providers to get the diagnosis they're seeking, resulting in delays that can take as long as 2 months for a TB test.
Right.
So then you have to think about how many people during that time and over that 2-month period are exposing other people to TB.
Right.
And all at the same time, it's advancing in the individual. So an early diagnosis should reduce transmission, improve outcomes, and should minimize the severity of the disease that the person has. And going on, one of the primary duties of public health organizations is to contain the spread of disease. Point-of-care diagnostic solutions like the kind Co-Dx plans to introduce could enable a much broader access to all of diagnostics, meaning better and faster progress in the fight against TB. And I think my last issue here is that it's kind of a startling issue, is that many people who are tested for diseases like TB and HPV often never receive a result. And therefore, if they're positive, they don't get the appropriate treatment. And sometimes this is a result of not being able to find the individual. So the ideal scenario is to have a patient come to a TB facility, get tested and treated in about a 45-minute window. And with the Co-Dx PCR Pro instrument and other point-of-care technologies, this goal can now be accomplished.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, certainly having being tested, that's critical for treatment. But how does point of care exactly improve access? I mean, in terms of it, is it putting in the hands of more people? In terms of say COVID tests, that we were all familiar with. That's a point of care test. Those little tests that we took during the pandemic, and of course your solution as well is I think it's about as big as, I don't know, maybe an old music box, maybe, or something along those lines. So is that part of it too? Is that just the size of the instrument and then the ease of deployment of that instrument? Is that part of access as well?
Yeah, I mean, you're right about the size. It's about the size of a tissue box.
Okay.
And And it's portable, it doesn't require calibrations, and so it's easy to take to the places where it's really needed. And I
Right.
spend a lot of time in communities around the world, particularly in India, where you have really big access problems, where you have gigantic developed cities that look like the streets of New York, and then you have slums going up the
Right.
hillside
Right.
that have no running water or don't have bathrooms. And these are the types of facilities where these diseases are really breeding. And so to be able to get to those communities where they are so focused on food and water and basic survival that you really have to make it more available to them if you're going to make a difference in point of care testing.
Right. Right. Now, one of the things that's interesting, because I know one of the areas you just mentioned, India. I know we've spoken in the past about what where you're deploying a lot of your solutions, and I think India and other parts of what we call the developing world are there, and you're really focusing on testing for TB. Why that disease and not something like HIV, for instance? That's of course a big issue in places like sub-Saharan Africa, etc. Why TB? Why the focus on that?
Yeah, and it's an important question, and I think it's important that it's not an either-or proposition.
Okay.
Okay, we're really focused right now on 5 tests that are in various stages of development or in regulatory approvals. So
Okay.
we have a COVID test, an upper respiratory panel that detects flu A and flu B, COVID, and RSV, a test in development for strep a test for TB, and a test for HPV, for human papilloma.
Okay.
And we intend to develop other tests for both the US and other areas. And your question about TB and HIV is that there's a strong correlation between TB and HIV. Together, these two diseases are a lethal combination.
Right.
And about 30% of global TB deaths are among people with HIV.
Oh, wow.
So it's important to understand that people with HIV are at a higher risk of acquiring TB due to weakened immune systems. And so with platforms like the Co-Dx PCR Pro and other point-of-care technologies, we can enable earlier detection and treatment and hopefully improve the outcomes of the lives of these people. And next, for us, HIV is primarily diagnosed by using a blood sample with PCR test.
Mm-hmm.
The sample type that the Co-Dx PCR Pro instrument hasn't begun using yet, and we really intend to explore this in the future. On the front of TB, there's a lot of urgency to get TB under better control due to the rise in drug-resistant strains that are becoming more common. And these strains have limited treatment options, they require longer treatment times, and they can have a more severe side effect to the individual. And antibiotic-resistant strains are a real threat to the world. You see that when you go to doctors here, Instacare, and hospitals, they're very worried about overprescribing antibiotics, and making sure you're prescribing the right medication for what the individual has is paramount to helping this issue.
Right.
And really the last reason why we're focusing on TB and emphasizing it is because countries like India have aggressive programs to curb TB. As you said at the beginning, we have a joint venture in India, and we've been active in that country for years. We understand the needs of that market, and we have infrastructure in place to make a difference in the fight.
Right.
So
it kind of coalesces with what the country's priority is, or their health system's priorities are in terms of treatment of TB. I mean, it seems like you're trying to be part of the solution. In other words, in that to put a fine point on it. I recently saw we met at ADLM about a couple of months ago now, I guess, and I saw your device, which I thought was really intriguing. Hence why I wanted to have you on the program. And one of the big benefits from my perspective, we talked a lot about this, is that your solution, you don't have to have a high level of medical training to provide the test. As I understood it, you train me for however long the training period is. I could provide the test. You could provide the test. So can you give an overview of how the Co-Diagnostics test works, how the system works, and am I overselling it that it's a non-medical person like myself could administer the test, not necessarily interpret the results, but at least administer the test?
No, you're exactly right. So the Co-Dx PCR Pro instrument, it's been developed to address both home testing needs and to improve accessibility in point-of-care settings around the world, including where the resources are limited. And so to be relevant in both of these markets, it has to be simple.
Right.
As an example of how simple it is, one of the objectives of our clinical trials for COVID was to demonstrate that a user without a clinical background could complete a test in a home environment.
Okay.
And so really how it works is that the user downloads our app onto their dedicated, it's really our proprietary app to their tablet or their smartphone. They enter their information. They pair the instrument via Bluetooth to their phone or tablet. They scan the test cup in the app. They follow step-by-step instructions in the app to collect the sample. And then the sample is inserted into the instrument. The user presses start on the device, and the results are delivered via the app in less than 30 minutes. On the TB test is designed solely for point of care. It has a straightforward sample preparation step after the sample is collected. And really another important aspect of our Co-Dx app is that it streamlines reporting of notifiable diseases to the appropriate agencies if it's applicable. So right. Certain tests are not always going to be appropriate in the home market. So there are going to be tests in a home market and an OTC market, and then there's going to be other tests that are going to be point of care centered to be able to, because they're going to be more sensitive diseases or other issues that need to be thought through.
Okay. Well, and you pointed this out. You've talked about this a couple of times, and kind of in your introductory comments about one of the issues we talked about this actually I think at the show, that one of the issues that places like India and even rural areas like in the United States or underserved areas, that you can't necessarily find the person afterwards to get the test, or it's this. You have to wait a long time to get it. So the person's moved on, or maybe they've changed their minds and don't want to know, or whatever the case may be. It seems to me not only the benefit of this is the simpleness, the simplicity, I guess, of the using it, but also the turnaround time as well. I mean, if you're 45 minutes. Most people can wait 45 minutes. I don't care what their situation is. I think they probably could wait 30 to 45 minutes to get a result. And that, I imagine that also is a big benefit for underserved or developing areas where the population, they're as you mentioned, in some areas of the world, it's getting by. It's hard, and you don't have days to wait or not to be able to work or what have you. So is that part of it as well with the turnaround time? Is that something you really worked on in order to make this a not only simple but also useful for getting that to that treatment stage with various diseases?
That turnaround time is really important, and making it so it's not a 2 or 3 day wait if you're sending it off to the lab. But as you said, going into if you're in an urgent care facility or in a doctor's office, you can wait 30 minutes to get that result, and to have the gold standard result of a PCR test, it's really impactful to that patient to be able to make a more informed decision. So yeah, I mean the time of that was really worked on to be able to get to that 30-minute or less window. And some of the tests in development will have a shorter window where it won't take 30 minutes. It will take 20, just depending on what disease or what pathogen you're testing. And so we aim to have everything about at that 30-minute or less mark.
Yeah. Is this also a factor, too, with what happened with COVID? Particularly in the U.S. market, we all got used to those, 15-minute tests. I take my swab and I do my couple of drops into the lateral flow test. 15 minutes later, I'm getting good or bad news. Is that also a factor that you're also having to meet the market, as it were, meet consumer demand in that way as well? Is that part of it, or are there other factors involved with that?
You're having to meet that market where people are used to those antigen tests at home that can take 15 to 30 minutes to do. But with antigen test, you're often sacrificing accuracy,
right.
and so part of the goal is to provide PCR quality results at antigen timeframes. Something that we're used to. So that's a big piece of it as well. It's got to be relevant. People are busy. They've got and they want to be able to do this quickly. And this 30-minute time window is the most reasonable area that we could settle on.
Right, right. And certainly, I think most people, kind of in an inherent sort of way, understand how important it is. Remember, my wife and I were actually just talking about that. But back at the beginning of COVID, you had to wait 2 days to find out, or more, if you had it. By that time, you were either, we're over it, or unfortunately, in a little bit of trouble. But then we've gotten used to that. So I think we also understand that how important it is to get those answers quickly, and then get whatever that treatment is as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So certainly, we've talked about it. You have a very simple point of care test that can be run by a non-technical person. Good fast turnaround time. For our clinical laboratory listeners, where does that leave them? I mean, are we going to see? Do you think we're going to see a shift from clinical labs for some tests? Is it going to change the way labs are working? How do you see Co-Diagnostics type tests? Because I think there are a few others out there as well. How do you see those fitting in, these point of care tests fitting in with the kind of larger landscape of clinical laboratories?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's important that our business has typically been providing tests to laboratories with our Logic Smart PCR test product line.
Okay.
And over the last few years, we've been developing our new device. And I think you're already seeing that consumer trend is shifting from the healthcare setting to the home setting. And laboratory testing will always be in the mix, in my opinion. But The advancements in technology are making it more practical to perform some of these tests closer to the patient, like with flu, COVID, or TB. The approach will offer quicker results and enable a more timely and appropriate treatment. And I think this trend is really being driven by what the patient needs. And when you just talked about the early days of the pandemic, where it would take 2 to 3 days, the process was costly. It was really hard to be able to even find somewhere that could do a PCR test at the very beginning, and then more tests online. And now it's possible to have a PCR test in 30 minutes at a more reasonable cost and than a centralized lab test is going to cost you. And I also look at times that I've gone to an Instacare and needed gotten a test, and you have flu A or flu B, or you have COVID, and sometimes you've waited long enough that any treatment options that a doctor might prescribe to you has now passed the window that it's going to be effective. And so by doing it at home, where right when you start to feel those symptoms, A is going to help protect other people in your household or other people that you're with. But if there are treatment options that would be recommended, you're going to be in a better spot to be able to get that treatment and have it be effective for you.
Right. Okay. Now, we've talked a little bit about this already, that much of the focus of the company is on the developing world or low-income world, however you want to put it. But there are also rural and underserved areas of the U.S., and we've kind of touched on that as well, that could benefit from your solution. Do you have plans to offer it in the U.S. in the future? Is it available in the U.S. at this point?
So it is currently not available for sale.
Okay.
And we have submitted a 510K for COVID-19 to the FDA for review, and we are in the middle of that process now.
Okay.
And so no, none of it is for sale, both domestically or internationally at this point.
Right.
Our focus is both on developing countries and low and middle income countries. And so in the United States, it is common to find patients in both remote and urban areas with the similar challenges to accessing care. And we talked about the compact size and the ease of use, and affordability is also really important, that are designed to make the gold standard of PCR test available in communities across the board, both domestically and internationally. We really aim to make the gold standard of PCR the standard for everyone that is looking for testing. So really, I mean, what's great about what we want to do and what we try to do is improve healthcare within our own country, in the United States, and in developed nations. But we really want to make an impact at the same time in some of these developing LMIC countries where the need is really great.
And what is the pricing structure in general? I mean, I assume it's not a ruinous sort of thing for. I mean, I know was a big problem, like in COVID. I think there was some issues with, in some of these countries, some of the countries that you're involved with now, the costs were just astronomical trying to get some of the testing and other equipment in. What's the price structures like for the device? Is it a leasing? Do you have a lease model, or would a health system buy it outright? How does that work?
I mean, I think the affordability of this device is really what we were aiming for, because in order to make an impact in LMIC countries and even on the domestic front, it has to be affordable. And you look at typical lab equipment for a PCR machine, and that can range from 10 to 30 to 50 to $100,000
Right.
depending on the size of the machine. They take a lot of annual calibrations and work to keep them operating. And many of us that got PCR tests for COVID saw insurance billings and another cost of $140 to $160
Oh
at the
yeah.
beginning of the pandemic, and that price changed around. But that's not an applicable price to many areas of the world, up in that $200, $140 range to get a COVID-19 test, especially when you have the expensive equipment behind it. And so
Right.
this device is, with its small footprint, we aim to introduce it to the market at a $300 price tag for the instrument. So with that, there's no real financing needed for anybody for a $300
Right.
price tag. And then our test cartridges are really in the $15 to $20 range. Probably about 1995 is where we're likely going to be introducing
Right.
the product. It comes time to do that.
Right.
But I would reiterate that in order to make a difference and to have it be accessible, the pricing has to be accessible.
Right.
And I think that's the main thing that we've strived to do with that.
Yeah. Well, and you also talked about calibration and the materials, etc. I know that it's that total cost of ownership aspect that often is not thought of. You think of that okay, the upfront price is $300. There we go, and sometimes it's not, or $30,000, and you forget that there is a calibration, there is all the materials that you need to run through the machine that can add to those life cycle costs. So certainly, it sounds like you've thought through that. So, all right. So I always like to end with looking ahead a little bit. So, where do you see you're involved with point of care testing all over the world and have I think a pretty interesting solution. Where do you see point of care testing generally in the next 5 to 10 years? I mean, is it going to grow? Is it going to change? How's the relationship with labs going to be? We've touched on that a little bit, but where are we going, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're already seeing significant advancements in the need for point of care testing, both in the United States and in global markets. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see families, wanting to run tests at home for common illnesses and utilize services like a telehealth service to receive prescriptions quickly. A lot of times when you order something on a shopping website, it can be delivered at your home that same day.
Right.
I think prescriptions are on that same track. And so I think I'm a father of 5 children, and I often deal with injuries from sports or ear infections, strep throat, flu symptoms, etc. And reducing that need for an in-person visit will minimize exposure to contagious illnesses, and I think it will really help ease the burden on healthcare providers. I think in many areas you're seeing that they would rather you go to telehealth first before they want you to go to an urgent care facility to be able to get to talk to a physician. And so, Chris, I would have you think about the last time you visited an urgent care facility, where you have a room full of sick people. They're coughing, they're spreading germs and viruses to others in the facility. Others are there with an injury, and generally everyone is in the same waiting room. We're touching the same surfaces, we're breathing the same air, we're touching the same doors, and you may go home from that visit with way more than you bargained for going in. And so, I mean, there's things that have to happen, though. So for care to shift to the home and for it to go to point of care effectively, it's crucial that these tests are reliable and they meet the gold standard of PCR, so that the results are going to be trusted by both a parent or a healthcare professional. And so, you brought up antigen test a little while ago, and when I went to urgent care, or when I used a telehealth service, they asked, what kind of test did you do at home?
Right.
And I did an antigen test, and they wanted me to now get another test using PCR. And so you got to have that gold standard so that the healthcare professional will trust treating you over the phone after visiting you with a telehealth
Right.
person.
Right.
And then going into global, in developing parts of the world, these technologies have a potential to really transform the delivery by replacing very outdated methods of address the gaps in healthcare. And you go into certain countries and they're using methods that are 100 years old to diagnose tuberculosis. And these methods can be 20 to 80% accurate depending on the level of bacteria and the skill of the technician. And using PCR, you remove that and you get the gold standard. And so I think these advancements, while they're going to be really impactful in the United States and other developed countries, they're really going to change the healthcare delivery in these underserved populations where the need is really most critical.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think we are kind of on a diagnostic frontier, as it were, with all these with your tests, and a lot of the other tests of your friendly competitors are developing as well. But unfortunately, with that, we've come to the end of our time. Seth, thanks again for taking the time to discuss point of care testing. I think you have a very interesting product, and I think a very interesting perspective on this. And like I said, I think we're on maybe a diagnostic frontier, or even a tipping point with where we are going with point of care testing. I also want to thank you, the laboratory audience, for listening, as always. Look for more episodes of Clinical Lab Chat in the future, and visit us online at clpmag.com and on all of the major social media platforms. Until next time, be well.